Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to start our series on the vanishing triangle. It's a term I really dislike. It just groups everyone together and the individuals who are missing, basically presumed dead in Ireland, are forgotten about. So I'm going to dedicate one episode to each individual. We'll get to know the person, the circumstances surrounding their disappearance, and then we'll group it all together at the end and see what we come up with. Okay, so thanks for coming back. You're welcome. If it's your first time, welcome. This is A Drop in the Ocean. I'm Louise. Let's dive in. Annie was the only child of her parents John and Nancy. She was a really happy, well-behaved child who grew up dreaming of being a teacher. As a young adult, she was funny, smart, mischievous, but she could be serious too. Annie was full of adventure and curiosity. She loved cooking, music, and was taking a beekeeping course here in Ireland and a real dance class. Her lifelong friend, Linda Ringhouse, saying she was beautiful inside and out in every way. Born in Long Island, New York, Annie first travelled to Ireland in the late 1980s with her mother's cousin Danny, who at the time was teaching Irish studies at one of the state universities in New York. Annie hadn't really wanted to come to Ireland because it would mean she would be away from home for Christmas, but her mother talked her into accompanying Danny. Annie instantly fell in love with Ireland, the culture, the music, the people. She had come for a 3-day stay, but while she was here she rang home to her mother and asked could she stay. But she had to go home and finish out the semester of college. Having completed the semester, she did return the very next year to continue her teaching studies here in Ireland. Annie McCarrick completed third level studies in St Patrick's College in Drumcondra and at St Patrick's College, Maynooth, before returning home to New York in 1991, where she completed her studies at Stony Brook University in New York. She again returned to Ireland in 1993, but this time she had made the decision to move here, to live, with the view of staying here permanently. She got everything organised, finding rental accommodation with 2 other people in St Catherine's Court in Sandymount, Dublin 4. She took to Ireland like a fish to water. She worked in a restaurant, the Courtyard restaurant in Sandymount. She also worked in the Café Java on Leeson Street in Dublin 4. She loved her Irish life. It wasn't all plain sailing, but we'll get back to that. So on St Patrick's Day, March 17th, 1993, Annie went to St Patrick's Day parade on O'Connell Street with friends and about 1,000 other people. Over the following days, everything was normal. Life was carrying on. Annie was having a great time, living it up, out socialising, working away and visiting friends, just like usual. Life was good. Plus, Annie's mother, Nancy, was due to visit in the next few days and Annie was really excited about this. On Thursday, March 25th, she dropped into the Java Cafe to collect her wages, but they told her they weren't ready, so she said she'd drop back in tomorrow to collect them. Then she went on to her friend's house and she ended up staying there for dinner. The following morning, Friday 26th, both Annie's flatmates spoke with her around 9 a.m. They were heading off for the weekend to their respective homes. So Annie went about her day, completing some errands, visiting Allied Irish Bank on Sandymount Road where she was caught on CCTV. She was shopping at her local Quinsworth at 11:02 a.m, which we know from a receipt. And she spoke with her friend Anne O'Dwyer on the phone, asking her to join her for a walk in the Wicklow Mountains. But Anne had hurt her ankle, so she had to decline. But Annie said she'd head on herself anyway. This was Annie's favourite place to go for a walk, and I'm not surprised. It's beautiful. It's at the base of the Wicklow Mountains, and it's known as the Garden of Ireland. Before she set off, she also phoned her friend, Hilary Brady, to invite him and his fiancée, Rita Fortune, to come over for dinner the following evening around 8 p.m. So the following evening, Saturday 27th of March, Hilary and Rita arrived at Annie's apartment for their planned get-together. They began ringing the bell to the apartment, but there was no answer. The apartment was in darkness. This immediately set off some alarm bells for Hilary. Hilary's brother Philip had dated Annie when she was studying at Drumcondra, having first come to Ireland, and she had remained good friends with the Brady family ever since. Hilary knew her very well, and he knew that she wouldn't just have changed her plans without getting in touch. He couldn't remember her phone number, so he rang Annie's mother in New York, asking for Annie's phone number, telling her he was outside the apartment and he hadn't got Annie's number. So he spoke with her mother for a while and then she gave him the number. Hilary tried calling, but there was no answer. Hilary and Rita decided to head to a nearby pub for a pint, quick drink, and then they would try again. But still no answer. It was dark at this stage, so Hilary and Rita decided all they could really do right now was go home. The next day, Sunday, March 28th, Hilary called into Café Java to see Annie, only to be told she hadn't turned up for work. Not only that, but Annie had been due in the previous day and also hadn't shown up. They hadn't heard from Annie at all. Hilary knew this was not normal behaviour for Annie. Hilary phoned Annie's two flatmates. They had returned from their weekend, but they hadn't seen Annie. They told him there was a bag of shopping left unpacked in the apartment on the kitchen table. Hilary immediately phoned Nancy in New York, telling her, "No one has seen Annie, she hasn't been to work and she's not at home." Annie had left the groceries she bought in Quinsworth on the Friday in a carrier bag along with the receipt on the table in the apartment. This bag included fruit and vegetables and the ingredients she needed to bake some desserts she was going to take with her to work the following day in Café Java. That receipt showing 11:02 a.m. is the last piece of physical evidence we know of about Annie's whereabouts, and then she obviously got back to her apartment with the groceries. Two separate local men saw her after that. One man, Bernard Sheeran, saw Annie leave her apartment just after 3 p.m. on Friday, and Bruno Borza, the local chip shop owner, saw her head to the terminal for the 18 bus, which would take her to Ranelagh, where she would need to get a connecting bus to Enniskerry to go on her walk. A former colleague, Emer O'Grady, reported seeing Annie waiting for and getting on the number 44 bus in Ranelagh. Emer sat downstairs while Annie went upstairs, with Emer just travelling a few stops to Milltown Court before getting off, so she didn't see Annie after that. Nobody who was on the bus that day, including the driver, noticed Annie McCarrick on the bus. Considering Emer knew Annie, this was believed to be a solid lead. Annie would have reached Enniskerry by 5 p.m. on this bus with only a little over an hour of daylight left. However, there was also a possible solid lead which wasn't taken into consideration at the time and didn't come back up until 2020. The late Margaret Wogan was working in Poppy's Cafe in Enniskerry that afternoon and reportedly saw who she believed to be Annie in the cafe, accompanied by a male. Margaret passed away in 2020, but her daughter Una has spoken out about this. Reportedly, when Annie's disappearance began to be taken seriously, which was a week following her actual disappearance, Una says Margaret spoke with a detective at the time reporting this sighting to him, as she believed this could really help with the search for Annie. She was positive it was Annie she saw that day. However, she was surprised the detective didn't write anything down while he was listening to her, and also she was more surprised that no one came back to follow up with her about it. Garda Detective Tom Rock, who led the incident room for Annie's case at the time, has recently said that neither he nor any of the investigative team received this information at the time, and that if they had, it could have changed the course of the investigation completely. So is it that Margaret Wogan's sighting reportedly happened just after 4 p.m, as Margaret was finished at 4 and she was just finishing up when she believes Annie came in with this man and ordered food? But this didn't line up with the official timeline they were working on, as if Annie had arrived on the bus and she was reportedly seen getting onto this bus. She wouldn't have arrived, though, before 5 p.m. But if she was in the company of a male, surely she could have gotten off the bus at an earlier stop and then went with him to the cafe by car, or did she get on the bus at all? She had left her groceries on the kitchen table and apparently also had left some washing in the communal laundry in the apartment, which was highly unusual for her. The description given for this male was that he was definitely shorter than Annie and he had a noticeably square face, so quite distinctive really had it been followed up at the time. Margaret also described him as gruff, with Annie being a lot more friendly. Then a doorman working on Johnny Fox's pub in Dublin, Wicklow Mountains, the famous highest pub in Ireland, also reported that he believed Annie had come into the pub that night about 9:30 with a male. He didn't know Annie, he had never spoken to her, and he didn't hear her speak that night. So he was just going by photographs released by the Gardaí. But no customers in the pub could confirm this, and Annie, with her American accent and being all social and bubbly, she wouldn't have gone unnoticed. So this is likely a case of mistaken identity. Unfortunately, this is the lead that the authorities went with at the time, with no trace of Annie being found. But Annie had arranged to meet her friends for dinner that evening. She had bought groceries to cook for their meal and ingredients to bake for the cafe, and these were all still sitting on the kitchen table. She was not the type of person to not notify her friends if plans had changed in any way. It just wasn't in her character. Personally, I don't feel she was in Johnny Fox's pub. Her friends were due over at 8 p.m. It appears Annie was already missing at the time she supposedly entered Johnny Fox's pub. Also, if this had been Annie, where was she for the 4 hours between getting off the bus at 5 p.m. and entering the pub at 9:30, with it being dark outside from around 6:15? Johnny Fox's is around 5 miles from Enniskerry, so she could have walked, but it just doesn't add up, particularly considering the plans she had made for the evening with her friends and how reliable she was known to be. That brings us to another interesting development. Just earlier this year, in April 2023, in a post on a missing persons page on Facebook, a man claimed that he and his friend had come across Annie's bag shortly after her disappearance, and they had handed it in to Donnybrook Garda station because they found cards inside the bag indicating that it belonged to Miss McCarrick. In the post he stated, "We weren't cops or detectives, we just handed it into the police station. I presume it was dealt with and kept." Cards of Annie's were in the bag. Again though, the Gardaí say they never received it. The Gardaí have been saying in recent years that if they could only find this bag, it could be a gold mine, and it turns out it could have been handed in to begin with. From what I can find, this is still just being investigated. Annie had been getting hassle from someone, quite a bit of difficulty from someone she knew. It was only after Annie disappeared that her mother became aware of this. Her Aunt Margaret said Annie's friend Anne had confidentially told her this. Now, I don't know whether this was Anne O'Dwyer, the person Annie had phoned the day she went missing, or if it's a different Anne. Annie had supposedly been romantically involved with a man on a few occasions, including the previous weekend. Annie was reportedly not happy about this. She felt bad about it. She regretted it because he was in a relationship. But allegedly he had been stalking her and had been physically violent towards her with drink taken. Annie's friend from home, Linda Ringhouse, said she, along with other friends and family members, realising this could be crucial information, had faxed these details to Ireland a week after the missing persons investigation began. But again, former detective Tom Rock says they never received these faxes, with his colleague Val Smith, who had been the detective who questioned everyone at this time, saying he wasn't aware that Annie had been assaulted by anyone. However, they had actually questioned the man named by Annie's friends and family in 1993, and for Operation Trace, which I'll explain, they hadn't found any link to Annie's disappearance. When they were re-informed about this situation, however, they looked closer at this person and his brother, re-evaluating what they had originally been considering sufficient alibis. It is believed this suspect lived close to Sandymount. They have no previous criminal records, but as it stands, no one has been charged. Operation Trace was set up in 1998 to try establish any ties between 6 different missing women in Ireland, including Annie, to see basically if this was the work of a serial killer. Now, we'll talk more about this in a future episode, but basically they couldn't link all 6 cases, although they did wonder about similarities in the cases of Annie McCarrick, Jojo Dollard and Deirdre Jacob. The main reason being it was like all 3 just vanished into thin air. As is the case with any missing female in Ireland around the time, following the arrest in 2001 of Larry Murphy, he is often mentioned in relation to Annie McCarrick and others. No links have been found with Larry and Annie McCarrick, and Larry himself denied having anything to do with this case. But he also couldn't be ruled out. In 2014, a book was published called Missing. The author, Alan Bailey, who is former Garda detective involved in Annie's case, claimed a member of the Provisional IRA in Northern Ireland is a suspect in Annie's disappearance. He said this man was on the run from the north. He was known to have been drinking in Johnny Fox's that night, where allegedly he met Annie and they hit it off, but he divulged too much information and so had to get rid of Annie. He supposedly called his handlers down from the north to help dispose of the body, and he apparently now hides out in the US. With author Alan Bailey saying, "I'm not saying that it's definitely what happened, but it was a scenario which came up much later and from someone who was deemed reliable." And there's no more about that. In 2020, the case was reopened, as Annie's family in America had hired a New York-based lawyer, Michael Griffith, who together with ex-FBI agent Kenneth Strange looked into Annie's case. Following new information they received in 2020, they believed the sighting of Annie in Johnny Fox's was a case of mistaken identity, and their focus fell on someone Annie had dated. So was this the person who had been violent towards Annie? Irish private investigator Brian McCarthy, who the McCarricks had also originally hired, joined up with Michael Griffith and Kenneth Strange. But I can't find anything further on this either. In 2023, a US private investigator brought up Antonio Angles, a Spanish serial killer who had featured in a 2019 Netflix documentary. Antonio Angles was a wanted suspect accused of being an accomplice to convicted criminal Miguel Ricard and one other man in viciously assaulting and killing 3 women. Antonio apparently reached Dublin less than 48 hours before Annie went missing, having stowed away from Spain on a boat, but it seems a lot of this is speculation, with people guessing where he actually went to. Is he even in Ireland? And who knows where he is now. Then former Garda detective and author of Missing, Alan Bailey, told the Sun newspaper on Wednesday retired Garda detective Sergeant Alan Bailey, who was centrally involved in the investigation of the missing tourist, told a Spanish TV programme about the fugitive's escape from police and the mystery of his current whereabouts. He said, "I would say Antonio Angles will remain a person of interest until he can be definitively ruled out and we know what happened to Annie." So does Alan Bailey no longer believe it was a provisional IRA man? Gardaí have collected more than 5,000 documents and taken in excess of 300 statements in the 3 decades the investigation has remained open, with it changing from a missing persons case to a murder inquiry in 2023. So where did Annie disappear to? Was her bag handed in but not acknowledged? Was Annie in a cafe in Enniskerry with a gruff male after 4 p.m. the day she went missing? Who was the male, and was that really the last sighting of her? What's the situation regarding the male who had been violent with Annie? Or his brother, or even his girlfriend at the time, right? Did they only consider men as suspects? Or perhaps women who knew something at the time, when women were still very much silenced, might just be more likely to come forward now if relationships have broken up or if people have moved on or whatever may have changed. With the latest news on Annie's case being that there is a suspect and his brother, is it just lack of hard evidence that is preventing an arrest? Hopefully someone will come forward and show us where Annie is so she can be returned to her family. It seems to me someone Annie knew is responsible for her disappearance. I do wonder a little bit about jealous girlfriends. I believe the man who assaulted Annie had his girlfriend as his alibi. However, we know Annie had already been assaulted by someone she was having trouble avoiding for some reason, and was allegedly seen in a cafe with a man on the day she disappeared. So this guy is obviously the suspect. To my knowledge, he hasn't been ruled out yet either, nor his brother, allegedly. Annie's mum Nancy said she just wants her daughter back at this stage. She doesn't care about justice anymore. I just think it's so sad when it gets to that stage. One thing is for sure, this vivacious, friendly, confident, competent young American woman who disappeared, now being one of Ireland's disappeared women, is still very much on everyone's mind and will continue to be so. Annie Bridget McCarrick was born March 21st, 1966. She's an American woman from Long Island, New York. Her parents, the late John McCarrick and Nancy McCarrick. She disappeared March 26, 1993, aged 27, from Sandymount, Dublin. She was 5 foot 8 inches high. She had long brown, wavy or curly hair when last seen. She was wearing a dark tweed jacket, a pair of jeans, oxblood coloured boots, and she was carrying her tan coloured bag. If you have any information regarding Annie McCarrick, please contact your local Garda station. I will put links in the description box. Thank you for listening.